Hello and welcome to The Drum. I'm Steve Kinane. Coming up, Treasurer Joe Hockey on the defensive about housing affordability as the PM shares his own stories of mortgage pain. The federal government denies allegations that Australian officials paid people smugglers to turn a boat back to Indonesia. And as Australia's ambassador returns to Jakarta, we talk to a representative of Human Rights Watch in Indonesia about the future of the death penalty in that country. And joining me on the panel, former Liberal Senator Sue Boyce, Michael Cooney, Executive Director of the Chifley Research Centre, and in Melbourne, Michael Batchelard, Investigations Editor for The Age. And you can join us on Twitter using the hashtag #TheDrum. Well, there was a shift in rhetoric today from the government over the issue of housing affordability. Yesterday, Joe Hockey said that people looking to buy their first home should get a good job that pays money. Today, the Prime Minister admitted that even Cabinet Ministers find it hard to pay mortgages in Sydney. The Treasurer has been accused of being out of touch over his comments. Mr Hockey says that accusation is playing the man.
Should you apologise after yesterday's remarks? Will you apologise?
Well, again, Marius, you're playing the man.
Yeah, I'm talking to the man.
Well,
we've talked policy as well.
Well, Marius, you can play whatever Labor Party Greens games.
The Treasurer's choice of words are very important. Yeah, and previously, you apologised for your choice of words. Will you on this occasion?
I'd just say to you, Marius, it is an old Labor tactic to play the motivation card. And when it comes to housing, increase the supply, but importantly, if people have more money in their pockets, then they've got greater opportunity to get into their first home.
Joe Hockey's comments were a brain snap, where he is basically saying and goading people, where he says to people on average incomes, teachers, nurses, paramedics, that somehow it's people's fault if they can't afford a house in Sydney. Joe Hockey needs to stop being out of touch.
It is increasingly difficult for first homeowners of modest to average means to become home buyers as they would wish to do, and I think that's a pity. That's why I say that rising house prices aren't doing any economic good anymore, and they're potentially doing some social harm.
Michael, these suggestions that Joe Hockey is out of touch, is that just playing the man?
I don't think you'll get any flowers from Gillian Triggs. I thought that kind of woe is me performance. It was bizarre. It was truly bizarre. Now, the problem he's got actually is that it's not just a case of a politician accidentally telling the truth and kind of a bit of robust common sense slipping out and sounding insensitive, because it reveals actually quite an important contradiction in the government's own policy, which is that they, generally speaking, think the only way to grow jobs is to make employment less secure and to slow the growth of real wages or indeed pay people less. So there's actually quite an important sort of underlying question here. Is good economic growth based on cutting penalty rates and making it easy to sack people, or is it based on secure high wages?
All right, Sue, will Joe Hockey's colleagues be questioning his judgment over these comments?
Look, I don't think so. I think, the fact that someone has said houses in inner Sydney are unaffordable for first home buyers, whole houses, is just a fact. Buy an apartment. I hate to do the back in my day thing, but to want something with en suites and whatever.
But back in your day, things were different, Sue.
Well, exactly.
They were
exactly. No one wanted to move into a 3-bedroom house with 2 en suites. No one expected to be able to as their first house.
It's not just about that. There's a whole generation of people who are really struggling now due to the prices.
Absolutely. And what I've been interested in is that all the coverage of this has talked about how will people afford a house when the median price is $700,000 going towards $1 million in Sydney. Well, sorry, median prices are actually in the middle. You don't have to have $700,000 to be a first home / apartment owner in Sydney. Let's be realistic about this.
All right, I'll get Michael.
And let's keep the argument as to what can a first home buyer do. And I'm sure that there are dozens, thousands of teachers out there who own houses and aren't waiting for Bill Shorten to be the one who sort of solves the problems of how they get a job.
I'll get Michael Batchelard's view on this. What did you think of what appeared to be a bit of a a retreat from the comments yesterday that Joe Hockey made. There seemed to be a bit more empathy injected into the comments today.
Well, I think he had to. I mean, I'm in the relatively luxurious position of living in Melbourne where things aren't quite as bad, but I think I did read something, Sue, about house prices within 40 kilometres of the city being unaffordable for people on average wages.
House prices, but not necessarily apartment in Sydney. And sorry, I'm a Brisbane person, so I'm in an even more luxurious position than you, Michael.
Well, look, all of this, you know, buy a smaller house, go further out, travel 2 hours a day, miss your children, all of that smacks of the kind of let them eat cake kind of gloss that Joe Hockey's comments made us feel, and of course he's had to try and walk it back today. But you know, the comment's out there, and I think he'll be pilloried for it.
All right, so I want to come back to another comment that Joe Hockey made today, which was on AM.
I was just going to say, I think the one good thing that did come out today was the fact that home owner-occupier loans are increasing at a faster rate now than investor loans. So we are talking about the fact that people can, you know, begin to look at. So we are seeing that increase that we want in the right area.
All right. Well, Joe Hockey did say today on AM he wants to see housing supply increase to improve housing affordability. Yet he also says he wants people to have rising house prices. Is he trying to walk both sides of the streets here? Because if you increase the supply, the housing's not going to keep, the value's not going to keep rising anymore, is it?
I'm not sure that he was suggesting that you wanted rising house prices, except in the sense that you don't want people to be losing value, ending up with negatively valued houses out of any sort of moves, which is exactly what getting rid of negative gearing would do. It would push prices down, and it would destroy, as it did in Keating's day, destroy the rental affordability market. So we'd end up in an even worse position than we are now.
People dispute that, Sue, but anyway...
Well, I think we've got the evidence of what actually happened in the real world.
There's an interesting fact check on the ABC website that people can look at on that. But anyway, Michael, I want to come to...
People from my side aren't entirely convinced by
some
of the facts. Some of the fact checks.
All right, OK. Michael Cooney, can I come to you on this? Labor's talking up supply as a solution too, as well as at the coalition. But isn't it the case that the federal government really doesn't have much control over supply? That's a state and a local issue, and therefore, you know, the responsibility lies elsewhere.
Well, this federal government doesn't, because this federal government explicitly says its job isn't cities policy and its job isn't housing affordability and its job isn't urban policy. And that's a very different approach from Labor's long-held approach, which does put urban policy and the cities and the nature of them, where their employment is, what their built infrastructure is and what housing outcomes are in cities, does make it a question of national policy.
But Bill Shorten's saying his focus is supply, it's not a negative gearing.
It's not only supply. He said that his focus is supply and that there's a range of things that need to happen. But Labor's got this...
I haven't seen policy, actually, from Labor on the topic.
Labor's got the big advantage that it says there is an issue here which needs to be addressed, right? So the government is going from saying anyone who says there's a problem wants negative equity, to anyone who says there's a problem just needs to get a better job, to saying, oh, I'm a cabinet minister who's got presumably a relatively well-regarded job, and you'd imagine they might consider them secure, and they've got a housing affordability problem.
But Labor's identified as a problem, but all they've got is a round table and a discussion paper. They don't have a policy yet.
No.
Well,
exactly.
I think what you've got to understand is that there's a series of processes underway which rightly take their time to propose these ideas and to work through them over time. That's unsurprising from an opposition.
OK, Michael Batchelard, can I come to you on this? Labor's not ruling out negative gearing, but do you think either side of politics in the main parties is going to be game to go there and look at the demand issue, not just the supply issue?
Well, look, there are a lot of really difficult issues here, including urban planning, and as Sue mentions, the number of apartments that are available in inner city areas. There's negative gearing. The Greens have got a proposal to stop negative gearing on people who taking out new loans now, so that the people who are on those arrangements already are not disadvantaged, and that potentially is a way forward because it stops new loans being written in that fashion. I mean, the fact is that investors at this stage can borrow money more cheaply because of negative gearing than ordinary first home buyers, and rich people can borrow money more cheaply because the banks will give them a concession on their interest rates because they seem to be a good risk. So all of these things are kind of introducing perverse incentives into the housing market, which is not just simple.
Surely,
well, of course,
key to the whole thing.
Yeah, sure. It's a truism. Get a secure job and be okay. But, you know, there are 800,000 people, ACOS tells us, who can't get a secure job. And there is increasing casualisation, reducing wages growth and so on. So these things, I think what people are reacting against is this kind of really simplistic notion from a couple of blokes who've already got incredibly secure and very well paid jobs and a very firm footing in the housing market. Fairfax is running a story today about Joe Hockey selling a Queensland property for $1.5 million, you know, which has doubled in value in the past 10 years. You know, to have guys like this telling people, I just get a good job, you know, go and buy a house, it sounds patronising.
Now, so you're critical of Labor for not having a policy on this, but what is the Coalition's policy to improve housing affordability beyond Joe Hockey saying to the state treasurers, release more land? I mean, he's asking somebody to do something. Is that a policy?
Well, I would have thought one of the core basic things, and Michael, you're right, get a secure job is a truism. But if we've got business confidence, we're more likely to have the opportunity for more jobs. So some sort of Labor support for getting through the more relevant parts of the budget would be, I think, a very good place to start, because business confidence is the key to getting all of this right. The market itself will, as I think we've seen a dozen times before, there will be a boom, there will be a bust in the housing market. Right. You know, Labor might like to say, well, let's you know, nationalise this and it'll never happen again, but that ain't the way it works in Australia.
Okay, just quick point, Michael, and we'll move on.
Business confidence keeps going down. Conservatives keep saying employment should be less secure. These things aren't truisms on the right of politics. They are truisms on the progressive side.
All right, we're going to move on. And you can read more on this issue on The Drum online. The ABC's Michael Yanda has dissected the Treasurer's argument that more housing supply will bring down prices. He writes that increasing supply might not work if the market is irrationally exuberant and could even make the situation work. Check that one out. An Indonesian police chief claims Australian officials paid money to the captain and crew of an asylum seeker boat to stay away from Australia. Fairfax Media is reporting today that 6 crew were given $5,000 each after their boat was accepted by Australian Navy and Customs officials in late May. Yesterday, Immigration Minister Peter Dutton was asked whether Australia pays people smugglers.
No. Look, as you'd expect, I don't operate. It's been the policy of this government since being elected not to comment in relation to on-water matters. We had 52,000 people arrive during Labor's period on 821 boats. 1,200 people drowned at sea when Labor were in power, and we have not had one successful people smuggling venture in over 300 days. We have stopped the drownings at sea. We have closed 13 of the 17 detention centres down, and we will do what it takes to make sure that those boats don't recommence, because the people smugglers are lurking in the shadows, waiting to see if Bill Shorten gets elected at the next election, because if he scraps turn back to where it's safe to do so, or if he scraps temporary protection visas, let me promise you the boats will recommence.
Michael Bachelard, the Minister denies this happened. What evidence did Fairfax Media have that it did?
Well, Fairfax Media is quoting Hidayat, the police chief in the island of Rote, where the crew and captain of that boat are currently being held in detention. And they have also interviewed a number of the people who were on the boat, the 65 people from Sri Lanka and Myanmar and Bangladesh who were on the boat, and they have written a letter to the New Zealand government. They were intending actually to go to New Zealand, but they crossed through Australian waters on the way, complaining about this and saying that the captain and crew were paid. Now, I'm a former Indonesia correspondent at The Age, and I have, you know, written quite a lot of stories about these kinds of things. I never heard of crew being paid before, but there were some suspicions in my time that perhaps Australian Navy or Customs personnel had paid them to go back. So I find the story credible.
OK, Sue, the Minister refused to answer follow-up questions. He denied it happened, though. Do we deserve a bit more transparency on this issue?
Oh, look, I think probably over time we'll get a bit more come out on this topic. I can't see any reason why we wouldn't accept the Minister's view at the present time, that certainly, as far as he is aware, and that's all anyone can say. If an individual took it into their own hands to try to do something like this, well, you know, yes, clearly, as more evidence comes out, it may well need more investigation.
Michael, they're pretty serious allegations?
It does illustrate the problem that the government has as a result of their lack of transparency. Like, there would be more confidence in the government's own operations if they were prepared to say more about this, and that's particularly given, as Michael's pointed out, the long history of claim and counterclaim about operations by AFP and related people in Indonesia.
All right, Michael Batchelard, do you want to chip in there?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that Peter Dutton also denied that anybody on Nauru had spied on Sarah Hanson-Young when she was there, and then was contradicted by his own department and by Wilson Security a day or so later. So, you know, it may well be that the question was framed in the wrong way.
Exactly. That was what I was wondering.
He was asked about people smugglers. Maybe he's saying, well, the crew aren't specifically people smugglers; they're the crew, or something. But I would not.
And
take
does
his
the
denial
government
at face
pay
value.
people smugglers? He was asked. Well, you know, clearly.
OK, well, staying in Indonesia, and Australia's ambassador has returned to the country after a 40-day absence. Paul Grigson was recalled in April in protest against the executions of the 2 Bali 9 drug smugglers. Ministerial-level meetings with Indonesia still haven't yet resumed. Now, we're joined now by Andreas Harsono from Human Rights Watch in Indonesia, who flew in from Jakarta this morning. Andreas, thanks so much for coming on. Now, withdrawing Australia's ambassador after 40 days doesn't seem like the harshest of protests. Will it make any difference to Indonesia's position on the death penalty under Jokowi?
Well, I talked to a number of government officials in Jakarta before the execution, and they told me the most consequences that we are going to see is the ambassador, Australian ambassador, will be recalled maybe a month or even 2 months. So it was not something unexpected.
OK, so they thought that that was the worst thing that would happen. Did that influence their decision at all, knowing that there would not really be that many repercussions?
Oh, there are many factors that involve in that decision. But of course, one possible consequences is ambassador being recalled, and they anticipated that.
Now, we have had a controversy here in recent days over Professor Gillian Triggs commenting that Australia's policy on boat turnbacks may make it difficult for Indonesia, and I'm quoting here, to engage with us on other issues we care about, like the death penalty. Is there any truth to that?
Yes, in general. But of course, there is no specific link in this push the boat policy and the executions of the Bali 9.
OK, in general, how so?
In general, because in Australia's standing in Indonesia and also in other parts of the region, Southeast Asia, including in the US, kind of declining because of this push boat policy. It is seen as not complying with the Refugee Convention. It is not seen as...
A convention that Indonesia hasn't signed?
Yes, Indonesia did not sign it. Yep. Because of the standing is kind of decline, they don't take Australia as seriously as before.
And is that the turnbacks part of the policy or the whole policy?
The turnback especially. It is seen as being, especially after this Rohingya crisis, when Indonesia and Malaysia decided to accept the Rohingya Muslim from Myanmar.
What exactly about the turnback policy offends the Indonesians?
It is seen as not being human, especially not being human. People in distress in the high sea and being turned back.
So what about people who are refugees who are in Indonesia, though? I mean,
yeah.
They're scarcely accepted either, are they?
Yeah.
So it's a double standard?
It is seen as being double standard.
Andreas, there's also a question, isn't there, of sovereignty for Indonesia, which Jokowi, the president, has made great play of.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, that turning back boats to Indonesia by Australia infringes somehow on Indonesia's sovereignty. Is that part of the argument as well?
It is also part of the argument. It is true. They also see it that way.
Michael, you wanted to chip in about West Papua as well?
Yeah, I wanted to ask Andreas, many people in Australia care about what goes on in West Papua, and I wondered, Jokowi in recent times has said he'll increase media access, he said he'll set political prisoners free, but there doesn't seem to have been much follow-up to that, and other institutions, including the military, have kind of cracked down again on those things. Do you think he's kind of victim of the hardliners here, or will he actually be able to push through these policies?
From what I see, it is a tug of war within the government itself, between the hardliners and the more moderate, even the liberal part of the government. The liberal, of course, would like to open up Papua, would like to stop human rights violations in Papua, but the hardliners always fearing about what they call foreign intervention, foreign agent going into Papua. And of course, they like to repeat the so-called ABDA argument. ABDA stands for America, British, Dutch, and Australia, trying to secede Papua from Indonesia. So it is still going on. Jokowi, the president, also would like to release 90 other political prisoners that, of course, Human Rights Watch support very well. But again, this is still fluid. The death penalty, executions, the Bali 9, the Papua questions, the anti-corruption commission pushback are all part of the way to seek a new equilibrium in Indonesia after the new president is in power. So we have the military is playing here and there, the police, the anti-corruption commission, political parties, don't forget, and many of these political parties are surrounding the president as well. And you, of course, knows very well that the president is not backed up by a strong coalition, and he himself is politically weak within his own party.
So do you think he's got either the smarts or the determination to be able to push through on these things?
I think he is sincere in trying to open up Papua. I think he is sincere in saying that he will be in Papua 3 times a year, which is such a great step to be compared with the previous president. He was in power for 10 years. He visited Papua only 3 times. And now this president say that every year 3 times.
But the president has sort of opened up, he said, Papua to foreign journalists. Have any journalists been there in the, 3 months since he said that? Has anyone tested out the strength of this?
Well, so far from mainstream journalists, not yet. He said that only on May 9, so about a month ago. And so far, I haven't seen mainstream journalists like ABC or Fairfax or the New York Times or CNN go there. Of course, there are small freelance journalists are going there, and so far there is no problem.
But there were French journalists in prison there less than 12 months ago. Yeah.
It was in August last year. They were detained for 2 months and a half. Meanwhile, their source was detained for 8 months.
Okay. Andreas, thanks so much for coming on. Well, the first part of Sarah Ferguson's The Killing Season went to air last night on ABC TV. Much of the pre-publicity has dealt with the internal chaos that endured during the Rudd Gillard era. But there was some praise too in episode 1 from some economic heavyweights about how Kevin Rudd handled the global financial crisis back in 2008.
A number of people were concerned, but this was the Prime Minister of Australia, a long ways away, coming in to my office and wanting to have a serious discussion about what was going on. And he understood not just the politics, he understood the economics. He knew something that I knew, which was the Australian banks were very dependent upon wholesale funding. And so a collapse of the banking system in the US and Europe would have been very problematic for Australia.
I think it is extremely likely that he was better prepared for any of this stuff than any political leader anywhere else in the world.
Now, Sue, you were watching last night. What did you think?
Even than me, said Ken. Wow.
What did you think when you saw a couple of fiscal conservatives like Hank Paulson and Ken Henry giving praise to the party that you've been trashing for years when it comes to economic issues?
Well, I must admit, I did wonder if perhaps Ken Henry was looking for a gig at the UN along with Kevin in the future.
Explain Hank away then.
I'm sorry, I can't explain Hank away except that he obviously fell under the very charismatic and beady glaze of Mr. Rudd. But, I mean, I don't think anything that was said last night changed the perspective of the coalition, which was that we supported the cash handout. We would have supported a sensible and less wasteful rollout of a second stimulus to the economy, but not the crazy and, in the end, dangerous results that Kevin managed to preside over simply because he was a lousy implementer.
All right, Michael, you weren't working for the government at the time, covered in episode 1, but you worked for Julia Gillard subsequently. What did you think of last night's episode?
I thought it was, I'm a Collingwood fan, it was a bit like watching the first half of the 1970 grand final. We're miles in front.
What happened?
We're flying. This is amazing. Book a room. Yeah, look, I thought, Hank Paulson's lived the counterfactual. He's seen the alternative, and he knows what we got right because he's seen it. He's seen a great recession, and indeed in Southern Europe, effectively a depression. And he knows what we got right, and that's the story that he was telling. And I do think that, I think many people came away thinking, gee, there was a fair bit in that documentary about the real governing project of that period of 2008 and 2009, much of which looks pretty good in hindsight.
Michael, what did you think watching back last night, reliving those years?
Well, I thought it was remarkable that only a short few months later, Kevin Rudd's head was on the block and Julia Gillard was about to slice it off. It just, you know, it kind
and
of...
then, in
looked...
episode 3...
That's right. The inevitable occurs. Look, I think it's fascinating, really. These shows are compelling because they give you an insight into what was really going on at times when all you could hear really was the bluster and normal kind of toing and froing of political debate. You know, we had Greg Combay talking about these issues. We
Very
had Rudd,
honestly.
Yeah, that's right. We had Rudd talking about the putsch against Beazley. It's just fascinating. But yeah, it did make you wonder why they ever did get rid of him.
Michael, did you feel like everyone was talking honestly last night?
I thought you saw a really honest slice of people's personality, actually. And I think for sort of Australians who are interested in the democratic process but don't have the privilege of knowing their key leaders personally, that's a really fascinating thing that only television can bring. And I thought you saw kind of Greg Combay's passion and candour. And I was working for Kim Beazley in 2006. I kind of agreed with Greg. And you saw Julia Gillard's kind of toughness and reserve, and you saw Kevin Rudd's determined effort to look intelligent, and Jenny Macklin's compassion. And I just think aspects of those personality come through in a way that the daily politics and media can't do.
So you know many of the figures here. Did you think they were talking honestly?
I must admit, I kept wondering why, if you were Kevin Rudd, you would have done this. And I ended up thinking perhaps we were going to be watching a 3-part job application for the UN gig.
You seem obsessed by that, Sue, to the UN gig.
I can't understand. And I mean, you know, whilst he was sitting there saying, even when Julia was chopping his head off, he said, "Oh, you're a nice person, Julia. Why are you doing this?" I just, you know, I kept remembering sort of rudeness and anger and swearing and a sort of violent behaviour.
You were thinking of the outtakes of that YouTube
well, exactly.
video.
I mean, and he did even make the point that he said repeatedly to Julia, "You're a good person." And I thought, yeah, I didn't buy it as Kevin's wonderful. Okay. And of course, we have yet to see the next 2 parts where we find out that Julia was also awful. And
okay. Well, we wait and see, we'll wait and see that. Yep. Episodes 2 and 3 to come. Thanks for all of our panellists tonight. That's all we've got time for. Sue Boyce, Michael Cooney and Michael Bachelard in Melbourne as well. You can check out the Drum website at abc.net.au/thedrum. And we'll see you again tomorrow night.